contract because the team goes down into the Championship. He doesn't feel like that sort of spoke to me. So it's all about assuming the club can maintain the same sort of playing squad, financially wise, over the next season. If they do go down into the Championship, because they're in a pretty shitty position.
It's not looking good, is it?
Well, they're one of only two clubs who've got nothing to play for still so far this season, really.
Yeah.
When you look at the kind of league positions, nothing to play for until the split, that is, obviously. Okay, on to news that affects you a bit more closely, Sarah. Hull FC back rowers Mark Minicello and Sika Manu have signed one-year contract extensions. Minicello, who's 36, has played over 100 games and won 2 Challenge Cups for the club, and also captained Italy at the last World Cup. New Zealand international, former New Zealand international, and probably every other Pacific Island international as well, Manu, who's 31, is in his 3rd season with Hull FC after joining from Penrith Panthers. Are you happy with this news? 1 year deals in the bag for each?
Yeah, I mean, Minicello, I've been in two minds as to whether we should say, you've been great, but you're getting a bit old now.
He's been a bit inconsistent and appears to be getting more and more injury prone.
Well, I don't know about injury prone. He's not actually had that many injuries. It's more, he just isn't making the same impact that he used to. He gives away some silly penalties, and he's very lateral running rather than direct running. But then I think part of that's down to how he's having to play, the fact that he's having to play 80 minutes every week.
Yeah.
Because of injuries elsewhere. So, yeah, I was undecided about whether that was a wise signing or not.
But Manu, surely
Manu, brilliant. And my other concern was when Minicello signed, I thought that was probably because Manu wasn't going. It had all been very, very quiet about Manu signing, whereas Minicello has said for months now that he wants to stay at the club. But no, you can't beat a bit of experience, really, and hopefully, with a better run of injuries, then Minicello will be able to play less minutes next year.
Yeah, and you've got people like Turgott and
I think
Downs and people like that who would be expected to get more game time. Is that?
No, I don't think Turgott's contract's up at the end of the year. I don't think he'll be kept on.
Right, okay, interesting. Okay.
Lee Bradford isn't a Turgott fan, I don't think.
I mean, he's got a hilarious sounding name. It's a funny word to say, isn't it? I don't know why you want to have that in your line.
He's Anna's favourite player.
Is he?
Yeah, she loves him.
Fair enough. Okay, what about what's been happening over the other side of the river?
Yeah, Rovers fullback Adam Quinlan has signed a new contract, which will leave him at the club until the end of the 2020 season. 25-year-old scored 16 tries in 32 appearances for the Robins since joining from NRL side St George Illawarra last year. Quinlan's new deal at the Craven Park has the option of being extended into a 3rd year.
We could probably update that actually to say 17 tries in 33 appearances because he scored again at the weekend, didn't he?
Yeah.
It's been going great for them this season. I was thinking yesterday about sort of like alternative dream teams, kind of a bottom 4 dream team. So players that are probably going to fall into the qualifiers who don't really merit being in the qualifiers with the way that they've played, and Adam Quinlan would probably be the fullback of that team for
He'd
me.
be first name, wouldn't he?
It'd be in that conversation, definitely. I think it's a good bit of business for them, and It doesn't make it clear whose favour that option's inside of, whether it's the players or the club's favour. But I still think he's only relatively young. He's a very skillful player. He's good for their level. He's not going to push them into a top 4 side. I think we saw that when he was at St Helens. He wasn't quite that calibre of player, but he's a very good Super League level player, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a good bit of business for them.
You said that struggled to come out, didn't it? That was always a compliment about OKR. You really struggled.
Sorry, my phone buzzed at the same time, so I was just saying what that was saying as well.
Of course, that's what it was. Yeah, it wasn't because of the lump in your throat getting out positive about Rovers. Okay.
No, No, sadly, I do think he is a very good player for them.
Catalan Dragons prop Mikel Seaman has signed a new 2-year contract with the Super League club. The 31-year-old France international, who has made 100 league appearances for the Dragons, is now signed up until the end of the 2020 season. Seaman began his career with Catalans, but moved to Wakefield in 2014 and spent 2 years at Bellevue. So yeah, we've seen quite a lot of him in Super League now.
Yeah.
I think this has arguably been his most impactful season as well. His second season at Wakefield was very good as well. Last year he slipped in form, but I think his form this year has warranted him a new 2-year deal, and I think it underlines that Catalans are still wanting to retain some of their core French Catalan mould forwards to be supplemented by maybe some kind of wiser playing players from outside of the local region. I think it's sensible on this year's form. What else is? Oh, we've got another Hull KR story to talk about, Sarah. What else is happening there?
Former Catalan Dragon Salford Red Devils halfback Todd Carney is back in the Super League after signing a short-term deal with Rovers. 32-year-old Carney left Salford at the end of last season, but was denied the chance to return to the NRL. Now he will link up with former Australia Test coach Tim Sheens at the Robins once he has received the necessary clearance and paperwork after signing a contract at the end of the season.
I mean, he's a very, very skillful, very talented player. His application of his skills and talent haven't always been there. For me, I think when he was at Salford, he kind of seemed disinterested in the back end of that season, and I don't know if that's a bad omen for this season at Hull KR, when he's basically being brought in to guide them through the qualifiers. But they've needed a halfback all year, they've been saying, despite everyone thinking that Chris Atkins played well and Danny Maguire seems to be fit. They've needed a halfback because once one of those two's out, they kind of plug-in for anyone, and it's never worked out any of those games where they've had to play without those first choice two. So I think it makes sense to bring a player in who is available, who's very highly skilled. Whether it'll last beyond the end of this season, I don't know. He doesn't ever really seem to settle, does he, over here? But then kind of has to fall back on it as his only career option.
Yeah, he needs some money, so he'd best come back.
Fair enough. Into the Championship now. London Broncos have completed the signing of front row forward Damaric Pello from Lemieux. The 21-year-old has an impressive CV following spells with Gold Coast and Melbourne Academy setups before joining the French outfit. After impressing in Lemieux's run to the grand final in the French League, Pello has now joined the Broncos as they look to secure a place in the qualifiers. I mean, I don't know a lot about this bloke, but he's got really big raps on the way he's been playing in France, so it'll be interesting to see if he can make that next step up. And the Championship is the logical step up from the French League for me, so I think that's an interesting move, one to follow.
Yeah, and Dewsbury have swooped to sign Adam Ryder from cash-strapped Keighley Cougars. The centre has signed a deal with the Rams until the end of the 2019 season after a superb campaign with the Cougars, scoring 15 tries in 16 appearances. Keighley released the 28-year-old following their recent financial problems, paving the way for the Rams to complete his signing.
Yeah, some more news from the Championship. Lee have released forwards Patrica Vaivai and Lorne Patrick with immediate effect. The duo joined the club ahead of this year, but managed just 15 appearances between them in their time at the club. Vaivai has missed the majority of the season through injury and has returned to Australia after struggling to adapt to life in England. Meanwhile, former Huddersfield and Wigan forward Patrick made just 6 appearances and hasn't featured for the club since April. And actually, following on from this, Lorne Patrick announced his retirement from Rugby League following his release from Leeds, which just at the age of 29 seems a little bit young. A forward who had so much promise in the middle of his career at Huddersfield and his year on loan at Wigan is kind of stumbled backwards after not convincing Wigan to take him on a longer term deal, and then Huddersfield palmed him off on loan a few different times. He's been around Castleford as well as Lee, and not really settled anywhere. So how do you think Lorne Patrick's career will be looked back on?
It's a funny one, isn't it? Because I've always thought of him as a decent player, and then, I mean, has he had some bad injury or something that's caused the lack of appearances and then his retirement?
I can't think of reading anything along those lines. So, I mean, he's played for Wales, obviously, as well, quite a few times. Obviously, maybe his heart just isn't in it anymore. That's the way I might look at it. He released a brief statement on social media saying, it's been a long 25 years in the sport, so obviously that's a weird. He's played since he was 4, okay, and 10 years, a great 10 years playing professionally, but it feels like a short career for someone who hasn't got any obvious major injury concerns that I'm aware of. But there you go. I think good luck to him in whatever he goes on to do. And plus, Lon Patrick was born in the same hospital I was born in, so I'll always hold an affinity to him for that, because I don't think many professional rugby league players were born in Blackpool Victoria Hospital. So there you go.
There you go. Rochdale Hornets have been signing of St Helens halfback Elliot Jenkins until the end of this season. The 19-year-old joined Saints from Thatter Heath, and has appeared for the under-19 side 22 times since 2017. He has also appeared for the reserve grade. Jenkins is also part of the Wales under-19 squad, coached by former Rochdale forward Anthony Walker.
Championship side Barrow have confirmed. So we talked a bit about Barrow last week and their troubles. Well, they've confirmed that Steve Neal will become the new chairman a day after David Sharp departed the club. Director Dawn Knowles has also left the club. They were struggling financially, as Sharp admitted the club came within hours of going out of existence. The club recently started a Just Giving page, hoping for donations to help them see out the rest of the season, aiming to raise £25,000. So big changes at one of the struggling clubs. I think it makes... I don't know if it makes sense to make changes, but it makes sense if the people who are running the club at the moment aren't doing it effectively. Someone else comes in and has a go at it. So there you go.
And Hunslet have announced the signings of Keithley duo Josh Tonks and Ryan Wright, as well as re-signing former winger Gavin Duffy effective immediately. Keithley captain Tonks has scored 6 tries in 2018 and made 33 appearances for the side since joining ahead of 2016 season. Leeds Rhinos Academy Project Wright, who's 26, will also leave the Cougars to join Hunslet, and former winger Duffy will also return on a deal until the end of the season, after previously taking time away from the sport for work commitments.
Yeah, and another line on the Keithley departures that I forgot to slip into the rundown, actually. Matty Berrahall, who's probably been their best player in the last couple of years, has joined Doncaster. So, but Keithley have come out and been quite defiant that these are the final departures. They won't have to release anyone else, and now they can start getting a settled squad back together to turn up for training and stuff like that, because they've had problems with that over the recent few weeks. I think it's really worrying time for the Keithley club. They're doing what Barrow are doing, sticking the cap out through Just Giving and hoping people donate to keep them afloat, but no one really quite understands what the long-term plan is, what that money is going to be used for this season, how it's necessary. Sorry, I've just had a run of my nose.
I don't know, it all feels a bit like, people are collecting money, we'll have a bit as well.
Well, it just feels there's no direction, there's no clear strategy. Like you say, it's just like asking for money, but what's it really going to be used for? And wouldn't people have been more inclined to put some money in if they thought it was going to be to retain the better players in the squad, rather than just to tick over the salaries of the other people at the club? Maybe, I don't know. It's a strange thing, but we've seen it a lot of times recently. And we've seen Swinton kind of restructured things and appear to have got onto a little bit more of a steady footing at their side of things after their problems at a similar time last season. So hopefully Barrow and Keithley and Whitehaven can all do the same. But the players they've lost, I mean, just look through the ones we just talked about. The top scorer and their captain, and then their key playmaker are players that have left the Cougars. So and gone to close rivals Hunslet. I mean, it's a boost for their squad as they run towards the back end of the season, when they're really in position fighting for one of the playoff places in League One. So that's interesting. Okay, and finally, I mentioned this up front, but Wigan Warriors will host fellow Super League title